Behind the Attic Wall by Sylvia Cassedy, Chapter 23. I couldn't come back right away, Maggie explained breathlessly. I got put in my room because I was looking for a hairpin to fix this leg, and they thought I was stealing their rings and they were going to send me away, but Uncle Morris came and gave me a hairpin and told them to let me stay, and now I can fix all of you up. She stopped. Did the dolls know who they were? Did they know Uncle Morris? Did they already know everything that had happened? "Did you know where I was all that time?" she asked. Miss Christabel sat unmoving against her chair, and Timothy John continued to stare across the room from the wall. Juniper and his ear lay side by side on the little straw basket. None of them moved. Could she have been mistaken? Maybe they hadn't called her after all. Maybe she was still the wrong one. "Hey, can you hear me?" she asked. A long silence followed. She slowly put down the things she had brought with her, the wired leg, the pink rag, the little jar of paste. "I brought all this stuff," she said, "to fix you with. I thought you wanted me back. I thought you were waiting for me all that time, and that's why you called. I thought—" Timothy John slowly turned his head. "All what time?" he asked. Maggie's heart raced, and she felt a trembling in her fingers. "All the time I was downstairs," she said, "and they wouldn't let me out." "But that was your time," Timothy John answered, "not mine, or Miss Christabel's." Slowly Miss Christabel moved the toe of her one remaining leg. "Maggie," she said, "do you have my other shoe? I believe I left my leg in it by mistake." "Did you bring the liniment, Maggie?" Timothy John said. "I seem to have a sore head." "Too much exercise," Miss Christabel said. From inside the straw basket came the half-purr of Juniper's voice. "Okay," Maggie whispered. "Okay, I'll fix you. All of you. I'll start with you." And she turned to Timothy John. "Where does it hurt?" she asked, reaching for the pink rag and kneeling at his side. With the tip of her finger she traced the slender crack along his forehead. "Over here, or where?" She expected him to wince or cry in pain, but he simply lay back against the wall. "Anywhere will do," he answered. "The ache is on the inside, where I can't see it." Maggie placed the cloth across his forehead and held it down with her fingers. A small portion of pink paste began to seep from the rag, staining Timothy John's brow, and she wiped it clean with her thumb. "Quite nice," he said. "What kind of liniment are you using?" "It's silver polish," Maggie answered. "It doesn't look like silver at all. It looks pink." "No," Maggie corrected. "Silver is what it's for." "My head is what it's for," Timothy John answered. "It's head polish." Maggie turned to Miss Christabel. "I'll fix your leg now," she said, lifting the doll's skirt. There were 2 holes in the upper part that lined up with the 2 in the lower, and Maggie wove the hairpin through both, twisting the ends into a knot and easing the leg back and forth to set it in motion. "There," she said, standing Miss Christabel on the floor. "It's all fixed." And she leaned back on her heels to watch as Miss Christabel moved slowly toward the papered wall and back to the chair. "It's just right," Miss Christabel said, leaning over and lifting her skirt. "Look, Timothy John, it's just the right distance between my knee and my shoe." Once more Juniper began to rumble in his basket. "Juniper has been cranky since the accident." Maggie looked at the doll carefully. "What accident?" she asked. "When we fell." "Fell? Fell from where?" "From the air. Where else does one fall from?" "He was in the air and he fell from it." Did they really think that? Maggie wondered. He didn't really fall. She began to explain, but she stopped in mid-sentence. "I think Timothy John's head is fixed by now," she said instead, and she lifted away the rag. "It must be," he replied. "The ache is gone." "Gone where?" asked Miss Christabel. "I can't say," he replied. "I didn't see it leave." Maggie wondered if somehow the scratch was gone too, and she rubbed away the paste, caked and dry now, and turning to powder beneath her finger. The crack remained as before, though, fine as a whisker, but pinker, like a scratch from a rose-thorn. Slowly Timothy John lifted himself from the floor and made his way to the chair next to Miss Christabel. "I see by the paper," he said, lifting his bit of newsprint, "that there's been a fire." Juniper began to growl again, and Maggie went over to his basket. "I can fix your ear, too," she said. "I brought something for it," and she unscrewed the lid of the paste jar. "Did you bring ear polish for Juniper?" Timothy John asked. "No, this is library paste." "Library paste?" Timothy John replied in surprise. "For pasting libraries together?" "No, it's for paper and china and stuff." "That seems a strange substance to use for dogs' ears." Maggie scraped off a fingernail from the edge of the jar and applied a bit to each raw edge of china. Next she pressed the ear to Juniper's head and held both pieces in her tight tight, 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 until her palm grew hot and moist and her knuckles ached. "You have to wait until the paste dries," she explained through her fingers. "And you have to hold very still or it won't stick and your ear will fall off again and you won't be able to hear." Was that true? Did Juniper hear through his ears? "There is a wash tub for sale," Timothy John announced, turning the scrap of newspaper in his hands. "It looks like a very fine one. Could you use a wash tub?" he inquired of Miss Christabel. "I already have a wash tub," she replied. "In fact, Maggie, when Juniper's ear is mended, you can help with the laundry." The laundry? What was that supposed to mean? She thought of watering the roses with an empty kettle and sipping air from empty teacups. Timothy John peered once again at his newspaper. "You might use a second wash tub for the dog," he said to Miss Christabel, and this time there was an answering rumble from Maggie's closed fist. "There's one for sale at Streeter's. It's guaranteed never to leak. But I can't quite make out the price." He drew the paper close to his face. Maggie leaned over to examine it. "That's because it's torn off," she said, "and besides, they don't sell wash tubs like that anymore. That paper is from 100 years ago or something." Timothy John looked at the paper again. "If this is today," he said, "then this is today's paper. Besides, it says wash tub for sale now. So there, you see." Maggie sighed and began to open her cramped fingers one by one to see if Juniper's ear was holding. "It's sticking," she said, testing it with the tip of her finger. "It's really sticking, but you'll have to be careful. Don't shake your head a whole lot." That was dumb. Juniper couldn't shake his head at all. "All of you are fixed now," she announced to Miss Christabel with her wired knee, to Timothy John with his pink scar, and to Juniper with his glued ear nesting in the warmth of her palm. She felt a sudden sense of pride. As far as she could remember, she had never really fixed, anything in her life. "I made you better," she said. "Better than whom?" Timothy John asked. "No, I mean you're not broken anymore." "Broken? You speak as though we're teacups." "Come," Miss Christabel exclaimed. "It's time to do the laundry," and little by little they made their way back to the other room. "See if the water in the kettle is hot." "See if the water in the kettle is hot, Maggie," she urged, "and then you may begin with those bloomers." "What are bloomers?" Maggie asked. "These." Miss Christabel held up a small pair of long underpants, gathered at each leg with a pink ribbon. Maybe she should go now. It was stupid, rubbing a whole bunch of doll clothes against a tin washboard in an empty tub and pretending they were getting washed. It was stupid doing a lot of things up here. Fixing the dolls when they were broken was okay, and straightening up a bit too, maybe, but everything else was playing dolls. "I have to go now," she said. Miss Christabel removed something else from the basket, a little square of cloth with red flowers, roses or something, embroidered into each corner. "Oh, Maggie," she said, "do this first. It's my favorite handkerchief. I always like to have a handkerchief tucked into my sleeve. It's nice to dab at things with." Maggie set Juniper down on the table. "I have to go," she said. A sound came from far, far beneath the floor, a call. "Maggie!" So distant. It was only a brush-stroke against her ear. "Maggie!" It was Aunt Lillian. The two dolls didn't seem to hear. Miss Christabel held out the tiny handkerchief. Timothy John looked at his newspaper, and Juniper sat upright on the table. "Maggie!" Aunt Harriet this time. "First, the handkerchief," Miss Christabel said, "and then the bloomers." "Maggie! Maggie!" Both aunts together. Maggie paused to look at Miss Christabel, her leg all nicely mended, with the tiny handkerchief in her outstretched hand. Timothy John had settled down in his chair and was reading the newspaper, just as he had been before his head got cracked, and Juniper, whole again, growled happily out on the table. She had fixed them, made them better. She was their caretaker, sort of. "See if the water is hot yet," Miss Christabel said again. Maggie lifted the little kettle from the iron stove and tested its bottom quickly with the flat of her hand. It was as cold as ever. "It's hot," she said. "Scalding hot." And that's the end of Chapter 23.